Welcome, dear listener. This is a story for quiet moments, for the time when the day has softened and the world grows still. My name is Mrinmoy, and I am honored to guide you through this gentle journey across the old English countryside. There is no hurry here, no destination that demands arrival, no tension that requires resolution. Only the slow rhythm of footsteps on ancient paths, the soft breath of wind through hedgerows, and the steady comfort of a world that has been sleeping for centuries. Let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts settle like dust motes in golden light. If you drift away before the journey ends, that is exactly as it should be. The path will wait for you, as it has waited for so many travelers before. Now, let us begin together. The morning came slowly to the small stone cottage, as if the sun itself were in no particular hurry to begin the day. It crept through the narrow window with the reluctant gentleness of a guest who does not wish to disturb, laying pale rectangles of silver blue light across the worn wooden floorboards. The traveler, whose name we need not know, had been awake for some time, lying still beneath the heavy wool blanket, watching the shapes of the ceiling beams grow gradually distinct from the shadows that had held them through the night. There is something deeply peaceful about waking in a place where no one expects anything of you. The cottage had stood for perhaps 200 years, its walls thick with lime plaster and its roof weighted with ancient slates that had weathered countless storms. Generations of sleepers had passed their nights within these walls, and the stones themselves seemed to hold the memory of their quiet breathing. The traveler felt this history like a blanket over the day, a permission to move slowly, to exist without purpose for just a little while longer. The kettle was filled with water from the rain barrel by the back door. The fire in the small iron stove coaxed to life with the patience of long practice. A handful of tea leaves, a chipped ceramic mug, the soft hiss of steam rising. There is no ceremony quite like making tea in the English countryside, though perhaps it is too simple and ordinary to be called ceremony. It is merely a habit, a gentle ritual repeated so many times that the hands perform it without thought, leaving the mind free to drift where it will. The traveler sat at the small wooden table by the window, cupping the warm mug between palms, still carrying the memory of sleep. Outside, the garden was a study in soft greens and grays, the mist lying low over the grass like a blanket that had been pulled up to cover the world's shoulders. A few roses, untended and wild, climbed the cottage wall, their blooms heavy with dew. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called once, then fell silent, as though it too had only just woken and was not yet ready for the day. The packing was simple. A piece of dark bread wrapped in a clean cloth, a small wedge of cheese, its rind faintly blue, an apple from the tree by the lane, a wool cloak, thick and warm, for the evenings that would come. The traveler's feet found worn leather boots by the door, and these were pulled on with the familiar ease of shoes that have long since taken the shape of their owner's soles. A long walk was planned, or perhaps not planned at all. There was no map on the table, no destination circled in pencil, no schedule of inns or milestones. The garden gate opened with a soft creak, the sound of a hinge that had been expressing its opinion for decades and had never been asked to be silent. The lane beyond was pale with mist, its surface of packed earth and scattered stones disappearing into the whiteness as though the world ended just a few dozen feet ahead. The traveler stepped through the gate, turned to look back at the cottage one last time, and then began to walk. The mist was cool on the face, carrying the scent of damp earth and something green, something growing. The traveler's boots made a soft, rhythmic sound on the lane, not quite a footfall and not quite a shuffle. The sound of a body moving without effort, of legs carrying their owner forward without any urgent instruction from the mind. The hedges on either side were tall and dense, woven with brambles and hawthorn, studded with the last pale flowers of the season. Small birds stirred within them, their movements barely audible, as though they too were moving through the mist with the same half-asleep reverence. There is a quality to English dawn light that cannot quite be captured in words. It is not golden, nor is it truly gray. It is somewhere between, a soft luminescence that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, that paints the world in shades of pearl and silver. The traveler walked through this light, watching the mist thin by the smallest degrees, watching the shapes of distant trees begin to take form at the edges of perception. The lane curved gently, and the cottage was lost to sight, as though it had never been there at all. The first hour passed in this way, in a state of motion so steady and unhurried that time itself seemed to slow. The traveler noticed the wildflowers at the base of the hedge. Tiny things, pale blue and white, their petals still wet with dew. A spider's web stretched between two branches, its threads beaded with droplets that caught the growing light and scattered it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. The mist began to rise, lifting like a curtain, revealing the fields beyond the hedges in soft, gradual unveiling. Somewhere a sheep called out, the sound distant and drowsy, more a sigh than a cry. The traveler smiled, though there was no one to see it, and continued walking. The lane rose gently, then fell, and the rhythm of the walk became a kind of meditation, a steady pulse that matched the slow beating of the heart. There was no thought of how far to go, or how many hours the day might hold. There was only the lane, the mist, the soft sound of boots on earth, and the gradual brightening of the world. By the time the sun had fully risen, though it was still hidden behind a veil of pale cloud, the traveler had reached the top of a low hill. The lane opened here, revealing a view of gentle valleys rolling away in every direction, their fields divided by dark hedgerows, their farmhouses small and distant, their church spires rising like fingers pointing toward the soft sky. The mist lay in the valleys now, a silver river that filled the low places, and the traveler stopped for a moment to look. There was no sense of achievement in this stopping, no pride in having come so far. It was simply the natural thing to do, a pause in the rhythm of walking, a moment to let the eyes rest on the quiet beauty of the landscape. The traveler stood at the edge of the lane, feeling the cool air on the face, listening to the distant sounds that drifted up from the valley. A dog barking once, the faint rumble of a tractor, the eternal murmur of the wind. Then the traveler continued. The lane wound downward now, and the mist closed in again, soft and welcoming. The sun, though hidden, continued its slow climb, and the world grew just a little warmer, just a little lighter. The traveler walked steadily, the warm cloak over the shoulders against the lingering chill, the small pack a comfortable weight on the back. The journey had begun, and the day stretched ahead, long and unhurried and filled with nothing more than the quiet pleasure of moving through a sleeping landscape. The lane carried on, endless and gentle, and the traveler followed it without question. The mist slowly dissolved into the warming air, revealing hedges, fields, the occasional distant tree. Birds began to sing in earnest now, their voices rising from the hedgerows and the woodlands in a soft chorus that seemed to encourage the day. The traveler walked through this music, feet finding their own pace, mind settling into a peaceful emptiness that asked for nothing and wanted nothing. A stile appeared ahead, a wooden structure worn smooth by generations of walkers, and the traveler paused to sit for a moment on its top step. The wood was warm now, holding the first true heat of the day, and the traveler sat quietly, watching a small bird on a nearby branch. The bird sang, then flew away, and the traveler sat a little longer, feeling the quiet settle around like the softest blanket. When the walking began again, it was with the same gentle rhythm, the same unhurried pace. The day was still young and the road was long, but there was no urgency in either. Only the soft whisper of boots on earth, the rustle of the cloak, the distant murmur of a world that was slowly, gently waking. And the traveler walked on, content to be nowhere but here, in the heart of old England, in the pale morning light, on a journey that had no end and needed none. The lane continued its gentle winding, as though it had no particular destination and felt no particular need to find one. It was one of those old English lanes that had been traveled by countless feet across centuries, its surface worn smooth by the passage of farmers and shepherds, of children walking to school and lovers seeking hidden paths, of all the slow and ordinary lives that had unfolded in this quiet corner of the world. The hedges on either side rose high and thick, woven into impenetrable walls of hawthorn and blackthorn, their branches reaching toward one another across the narrow way as though they wished to embrace. The traveler walked at a pace that could not truly be called walking at all. It was something slower, more contemplative, a movement that was almost more thought than action. Each step was taken with the same deliberate gentleness, the same careful placement of boot on earth, so that the soft sound of footfall became a quiet rhythm that seemed to match the distant beating of some ancient, sleepy heart. The hedge on the left was alive with tiny movements, the rustle of small creatures going about their morning business, the flutter of birds that moved from branch to branch with no apparent urgency. There was a quality to the light that cannot be described without repeating oneself, and the repetition itself was part of the pleasure. It was the same soft glow that had accompanied the dawn, that seemed to emanate from the sky and the earth alike, filling every corner of the world with a gentle luminescence that was not quite gold and not quite gray. The traveler watched this light shift and change with each passing minute, noticing how it caught the leaves of the hedge, how it lay in pools on the lane, how it seemed to grow warmer and yet no brighter. The wildflowers at the base of the hedge were a continual source of quiet wonder. There were tiny blue flowers whose names the traveler could not quite remember. Their petals no larger than a fingernail, clustered in groups that seemed to scatter color like forgotten jewels. There were white ones with faces that turned toward the sky, and yellow ones that glowed with a soft, buttery warmth. The traveler stopped from time to time to look at these flowers, not examining them with any scientific attention, but simply allowing the eyes to rest upon their simple beauty. The sound of the traveler's own footsteps became a kind of music, a steady rhythm that was occasionally joined by other sounds, a distant bird, the rustle of wind in the hedge, the faint bleating of sheep from some unseen field. These sounds mingled together, creating a soft soundscape that seemed to wrap around the traveler like a warm and familiar embrace. There was no jarring note, no sudden noise that might startle or disturb, only the gentle symphony of a world that was content to move at its own unhurried pace. After what might have been an hour, or perhaps two, or perhaps no time at all, the traveler came to a place where a low stone wall marked the edge of a field. The wall was old, its stones worn smooth by generations of rain and wind, their surfaces covered with patches of soft, velvet moss that glowed green in the gentle light. A single tree, a gnarled old oak, spread its branches over the wall, creating a patch of deep shade that seemed to invite rest. The traveler sat on the wall, the warm stone comfortable beneath the wool cloak, and took out the cloth-wrapped bread and cheese. The bread was dark and dense, the kind of loaf that fills the stomach slowly and thoroughly, and the cheese had the sharp, earthy taste of the English countryside. There was no ceremony to this meal, no attempt to make it more than it was. The traveler ate slowly, breaking off small pieces of bread, savoring the texture and the taste, watching the clouds drift lazily across the pale sky. A small stream ran along the edge of the field, its water clear and shallow, making the softest of sounds as it moved over stones. The traveler took a drink from this stream, cupping the cool water in both hands and raising it to the lips. There was something ancient about this act, something that connected the present moment to all the countless moments before it, when other travelers had stopped at this same stream to drink and rest and continue on their way. The rest was not a rest that ended quickly. The traveler remained on the stone wall for a long time, watching the clouds, listening to the water, feeling the gentle warmth of the day. A small bird landed on the branch of the oak and sang a few notes, its voice soft and melodic, before flying away again. The sheep in the distance called to one another, their voices carrying across the fields in long, languid notes that seemed to stretch time itself. When the traveler finally stood, it was with no sense of having delayed or wasted time. The walk was the purpose, the act of moving through this quiet landscape, and whether one moved or sat, the experience was the same. The body felt rested, the mind felt settled, and the lane stretched ahead, still winding, still hedged, still carrying its endless travelers toward no particular destination. The afternoon light had begun to shift by the time the traveler resumed walking, though it was impossible to say precisely when this change had occurred. The shadows had grown just slightly longer. The colors of the landscape had deepened to a richer green. The air had taken on a faint warmth that spoke of the day's slow passage. The traveler walked on, the rhythm of footsteps once again steady and sure, the familiar sounds of the hedge and the fields accompanying each step. A small wooden stile appeared ahead, marking the crossing point where the lane gave way to a footpath that led across the fields. The traveler paused at this stile, not immediately crossing, but standing for a moment and looking out at the landscape beyond. The fields rolled away in gentle waves, their grasses swaying in a breeze that was just barely perceptible, their colors shifting from green to palest gold where the sun caught them. A church tower rose in the distance, its stone pale against the darkening sky. The traveler did not climb the stile. Instead, the traveler sat down beside it, on the worn earth where countless others had sat before, and watched the clouds drift. They moved slowly, their shapes changing by the smallest degrees, white and gray and touched with soft pink where the lowering sun caught them. The clouds had no destination, no schedule, no need to be anywhere but where they were. The traveler watched them for a long time, breathing slowly, feeling the cool grass against the hands, listening to the soft sounds of the countryside settling into the quiet of evening. The journey had been long, And yet it had not felt long at all. The lane, the hedge, the fields, the clouds, they had all combined into a seamless experience, a slow and steady unfolding that seemed to have no beginning and no end. The traveler sat by the stile, not quite ready to move on, feeling the peace of the moment like a physical weight, warm and comforting and filled with nothing but the simple pleasure of being here. As the light continued to fade, the traveler stood at last, moved to the stile and climbed over it. The path beyond led into a wide meadow, its grass long and swaying, its flowers beginning to close their petals for the night. The traveler walked on, the same steady pace, the same soft footfall, the same gentle rhythm that had carried through all the hours of this long and beautiful day. And the hedge, the lane, the fields, the sky, all of it continued, unchanged and unchanging, a landscape that had waited forever and would wait forevermore. The meadow opened before the traveler like a vast green sea, its grasses swaying in a slow, hypnotic rhythm that seemed to pulse with the very breath of the earth. The path that had led through the stile had quickly dissolved into the tall grass, and the traveler walked now without any clear guide, stepping through the wild expanse with the same unhurried pace that had carried through all the miles of the morning and the afternoon. There was something deeply freeing about this open space, something that spoke to the soul's need for distance and empty spaces. The wind moved through the grass in waves, each sweep of its invisible hand bending the stalks into patterns that changed from moment to moment. The traveler watched these patterns unfold, noticing how the light played on the moving surfaces, how the green shifted to silver and back again as the wind passed through. It was a sight that could have held the attention for hours, and indeed it did, for the traveler's steps slowed almost to a halt as the simple beauty of the meadow asserted itself. There is a scent to English meadows in the late summer that cannot be found anywhere else. It is a mixture of dried grass and wild herbs, of earth that has been warmed by the sun and flowers that have given their perfume to the air. The traveler breathed this scent deeply, feeling it fill the lungs and calm the spirit, recognizing it as one of those pleasures that require no thought, no effort, only the simple act of being present. The church tower that had been visible from the stile was still visible now, rising from the distant landscape like a stone finger pointing toward the sky. It did not seem to grow closer, no matter how far the traveler walked, and this was somehow reassuring. Some things in this landscape were eternal, fixed in their places, unchanging across the centuries. The traveler felt no need to reach the church, no desire to see it more clearly. It was enough that it was there, a constant presence in a world that was otherwise filled with shifting grasses and changing light. The traveler walked in a straight line, or as straight as was possible through the uneven ground of the meadow. There was no reason for this direction except that it felt natural, that it led toward the church tower and away from the lane, that it followed the lay of the land without resistance. The steps were measured, unhurried, each one following the last with the same steady rhythm that had become as natural as breathing. After a time, the ground began to slope gently downward, and the traveler found a small stream running through the meadow. It was a modest stream, barely more than a trickle, but its water was clear and cold, and it sang a soft song over its bed of rounded stones. The traveler stopped at the water's edge and knelt, dipping one hand into the cool flow, feeling the gentle current press against the skin. The stream was lined with mossy stones, their surfaces soft and green, and the traveler sat on one of these stones, feeling the cool dampness seep through the wool cloak. The water murmured on, indifferent to the presence of the traveler, continuing its slow journey towards some unseen river. Small insects danced above the surface, their wings catching the light in brief flashes of iridescence. A dragonfly, brilliant blue, alighted on a nearby stone and sat for a moment, its wings folded like stained glass. The traveler drank from the stream, cupping the cool water in both hands and raising it to the lips. There was a sense of ritual in this, a connection to the countless travelers who had stopped at other streams across the ages, drinking the same water, feeling the same coolness, pausing in the same way before continuing on. The water tasted of earth and stone and something indefinable that was simply the taste of the English countryside. The rest by the stream was long and peaceful. The traveler sat on the mossy stone, watching the water flow, listening to its quiet music, feeling the breeze on the face. The church tower remained in the distance, no closer and no farther than before. The sky had grown a shade darker, the clouds gathering in soft clusters that seemed to drift without purpose. The afternoon was deepening, the light beginning to take on that golden quality that speaks of approaching evening. The traveler lay back in the soft grass for a time, letting the body rest fully on the cushion of earth and vegetation. The grass was tall enough to hide the view of the landscape, but the sky was visible, vast and open, filled with clouds that drifted in slow patterns. The traveler watched these clouds for a long time, noticing how they changed shape by the smallest degrees, how they merged and separated, how they carried the light in shifting patterns of gray and white and pale rose. There is something profoundly restful about lying in long grass and watching the clouds drift overhead. The concerns of the world seem to fall away. The pressures and demands that usually fill the mind become distant and unimportant. The traveler felt this peace settle over like a blanket, a warm and comfortable feeling that asked for nothing and offered everything. The breathing slowed, the muscles relaxed, and for a time, the traveler was neither awake nor asleep but something in between, a state of pure rest that required no effort. When the traveler finally sat up, it was with the sense that time had passed but that no time had been lost. The stream still murmured its quiet song. The wind still moved through the grass. The church tower still stood in the distance. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had become somehow deeper, more settled, more at peace. The traveler stood, brushed the grass from the cloak, and began walking again, following the path that lay across the meadow toward the distant tower. The walking was easier now, the body refreshed and the mind clear. The traveler noticed details that had been invisible before. Tiny flowers hidden in the grass, a group of butterflies dancing together in a patch of sunlight, the way the shadows of clouds moved across the fields like slow, dark ships. These details came and went, each one a small gift of attention, each one adding to the richness of the journey. The meadow continued for what seemed like a long time, and the traveler was content to walk through it without any thought of its end. The church tower remained in the distance, a constant companion that asked nothing and offered only its quiet presence. The sky continued its slow drift toward evening, the clouds taking on warmer colors as the sun began its descent, and the traveler walked on, each step a meditation, each breath a prayer, each moment a gift of pure and simple being. The meadow eventually gave way to woodland, and the transition was so gradual that the traveler scarcely noticed it. The grass became scattered with saplings, then with young trees, and then the canopy closed overhead and the landscape changed entirely. The sun was filtered through the leaves, casting a dappled light that moved and shifted with the breeze, creating patterns of gold and green that seemed to dance across the forest floor. The trees were oak and beech, their trunks thick and ancient, their branches reaching toward the sky in gestures of patient growth. The traveler walked among them, feeling the soft earth beneath the boots, smelling the rich scent of damp leaves and moss. This was a gentle woodland, open and welcoming, without the darkness or mystery that some forests hold. The paths were clear and easy, the light was soft and warm, and the sounds were those of peace and quiet. Moss covered the ground in patches, its deep green a contrast to the brown of the earth and the pale gray of the stones. The traveler stepped on this moss with care, feeling its softness, noticing how it held the moisture from earlier rains. The leaves above the traveler's head were just beginning to turn, a few of them showing the first hints of gold that would spread through the whole woodland in the weeks to come. This was autumn's gentle announcement, a whisper of the change to come, spoken in the language of color and light. The wood pigeons called from the treetops, their voices a soft, repetitive cooing that seemed to embody the very spirit of the afternoon. The traveler listened to these calls, each one a note in a simple song that had been sung for generations. There was no urgency in the pigeons' voices, no message that needed to be understood, only the peaceful repetition of a sound that was as natural to this place as the trees themselves. A fallen log lay across the path, its bark soft with age, its surface covered with the delicate white caps of tiny mushrooms. The traveler sat on this log, feeling the cool wood beneath the cloak, taking the remaining cheese and apple from the pack. The cheese was soft now, warmed by the day, and it spread easily on the last piece of bread. The apple was crisp and sweet, its juice running down the chin as the traveler bit into it. The meal was simple and perfect, a quiet celebration of the journey and the day. The traveler ate slowly, savoring each bite, watching the dappled light play on the forest floor. A small creature, perhaps a mouse or a vole, rustled in the leaves nearby, going about its business with the same unhurried attention that characterized the whole landscape. The traveler did not try to see the creature, only listened to its small sounds and felt the peace of its presence. The afternoon deepened, and the light began to take on that golden quality that speaks of time passing. The shadows grew longer, the colors of the leaves grew richer, and the sounds of the woodland shifted into something softer and more intimate. The traveler remained on the log for a long time, not wanting to leave this peaceful place, feeling the quiet settle into the bones like a warmth that comes from deep inside. But the journey was not yet complete, and the traveler stood at last, carefully wrapping the cloth that had held the food and placing it back in the pack. The path led deeper into the woodland, through a grove of beech trees whose branches formed a high canopy that seemed to hold the light in a soft embrace. The traveler walked on, the pace unchanged, the rhythm as steady as it had been since the dawn. The woods were a place of enchantment, of soft miracles and gentle wonders. The traveler noticed how the light fell on the leaves, how each tree seemed to hold its own particular shape and character, how the moss on the stones varied in color and texture. There were mushrooms growing in clusters at the base of trees, their caps varying from white to brown to a pale, delicate pink. There were ferns that unfurled their fronds in perfect spirals, and tiny flowers that grew in the deepest shade. The path led to a small clearing, where the canopy opened to reveal the sky, now soft with the colors of approaching evening. The traveler paused in this clearing, looking up at the sky, feeling the cool air on the face. A single bird flew overhead, its wings silent, its course steady. The traveler watched it until it was lost from sight, then looked back at the woods that waited ahead. Walking through the quiet woods as the afternoon faded was like walking through a dream of green and gold, of soft light and softer sounds. The traveler moved without effort, the body knowing what to do, the mind free to wander. There were no thoughts of destination, no plans for what would come. Only the path, the trees, the dappled light, and the simple pleasure of being in this gentle, ancient place. The light grew softer still, and the woodland began to change again, the trees thinning to reveal glimpses of fields beyond. The journey was leading the traveler out of the woods and toward something new, but the traveler did not hurry, did not push, did not anticipate. The steps continued at their steady pace. The breathing remained deep and slow, and the peace of the afternoon settled into the heart like a seed planted in rich earth. The woods gave way to fields, and the fields gave way to a narrow road, and the road led eventually to a village that seemed to have been sleeping for 100 years. The traveler emerged from the last of the trees to find a scene of such perfect stillness that it might have been painted by a hand that knew nothing of hurry. The cottages were of soft gray stone, their roofs covered with thick thatch, their windows small and deep set, reflecting the last light of the fading day. The village street was empty, and the silence was so complete that the traveler's footsteps seemed loud against the paving stones. A single cat slept on a windowsill, its tail curled around its body, its eyes closed in perfect contentment. The traveler paused to look at this cat, and then continued walking, the pace even slower now, as though the village itself demanded a gentleness that matched its own deep peace. Smoke rose from one or two chimneys, thin spirals that climbed straight upward in the still air, carrying the scent of wood smoke and home. The traveler breathed this scent, feeling its warmth, recognizing it as one of the ancient smells of civilization, a smell that had risen from cottages like these for centuries. The villages of England had been built around such fires, their lives shaped by the same patterns of rising and setting, of working and resting, of living and dying. A gate closed somewhere in the distance, the sound soft and respectful, as though the person who closed it had no desire to disturb the evening peace. The traveler stopped in the middle of the street and simply stood, letting the village wash over the senses. The sound of a door opening and closing, the murmur of a voice from within a cottage, the faint clatter of dishes being put away. These were the sounds of ordinary life, sounds that had echoed through these streets for generations. The village green was a patch of soft grass at the heart of the settlement, surrounded by ancient trees whose branches spread in generous arcs. The traveler found an old bench set against the trunk of a great oak, and sat upon it, feeling the worn wood beneath the cloak, watching the last light of the day fade from the sky. The clouds had taken on colors of rose and lavender, and the first stars were beginning to appear, faint pinpricks of light in the deepening blue. No one spoke to the traveler, and the traveler did not expect to be spoken to. This was a place that respected silence, that understood the value of being left alone with one's thoughts. The village knew its own rhythms, its own patterns of life, and it did not require strangers to participate in them. The traveler was welcome to sit, to rest, to observe, and then to move on. That was the way of such places. The cat that had been sleeping on the windowsill appeared on the green, walking with the slow, deliberate steps of a creature that owns the world and is in no hurry to explore it. It approached the bench where the traveler sat, looked up with eyes that held the wisdom of ages, and then curled up at the traveler's feet. The traveler looked down at the cat, and the cat looked up at the traveler, and neither of them required anything from the other. There is a particular quality to the dusk in an English village, a blending of light and shadow, of day and night, of activity and rest. The traveler felt this quality settle around like a cloak, soft and warm and infinitely comforting. The sky continued to darken, the stars to appear, and the village to settle into its evening peace. Lights appeared in the cottage windows, soft yellow glows that spoke of families gathered around fires, of meals being prepared, of stories being told. The traveler did not seek any of these things. The bench was comfortable, the cat was warm at the feet, and the peace was deep and complete. For a time, there was nothing but this: the gradual fading of the light, the cooling of the air, the soft sounds of a village settling into its nightly rest. The traveler breathed slowly, deeply, feeling the day's journey in the muscles, the bones, the quiet heart. When the traveler finally stood, it was with a sense of gratitude for this place that had offered rest without demand, peace without price. The cat stirred, stretched, and walked away into the deepening shadows, its task of companionship complete. The traveler walked through the village street, past the cottages with their glowing windows, past the green with its ancient trees, past the church whose tower rose against the darkening sky. The village faded behind the traveler as the lane continued into the countryside, and the traveler walked on into the night, the first stars lighting the way. The day had been long, and the journey had been uneventful, and the traveler was content. The sky above was vast and beautiful, the air was cool and sweet, and the road led on into the peaceful darkness of the English night. The night had fully settled by the time the traveler left the village behind, and the lane that stretched ahead was pale under a cloudy sky. There were stars, but they were few and soft, their light diffused by the thin veil of cloud that covered the heavens. The traveler walked in this gentle darkness, the eyes adjusting slowly, the feet finding their way along the familiar surface of the road. There is a quality to night walking that cannot be found in the day. The world becomes simpler, more essential, reduced to the sounds of footsteps and breathing, the feel of the air on the face, the sense of the body moving through space. The traveler felt this simplicity, embraced it, let the darkness hold the thoughts and calm the mind. There was nothing to see that required attention, nothing to hear that demanded response. Only the rhythm of walking, steady and sure. The cool air was soft on the skin, carrying the sense of the night, damp earth, green growth, the faint sweetness of flowers that opened only in the darkness. The traveler breathed these scents, letting them fill the senses, feeling their connection to the deep and ancient world that lay beneath the surface of the day. The night had its own life, its own quiet activities, and the traveler was a guest in this world, moving through it with respect and wonder. A small animal rustled in the hedge, its movements barely audible, its presence known only through the soft sounds of its passage. The traveler did not startle, did not pause, only continued walking, letting the sound be part of the night's music. The hedge on either side was dark, its details invisible, but the traveler knew it was there, knew its shape and texture from the long hours of the day. The familiarity was comforting, a thread connecting the night to the day that had come before. The lane rose gently, and the traveler climbed the slope with the same steady pace, the boots finding their grip on the earth, the body leaning slightly into the ascent. At the top of the rise, the traveler stopped for a moment, not from weariness but from a sense of wonder. The view stretched out in every direction, a landscape of softly rolling hills that were visible only as darker shapes against the slightly lighter sky. The stars seemed closer here, their light more distinct, and the traveler stood for a long time, looking at this vast and beautiful darkness. A gate stood at the side of the lane, its bars pale in the dim light, and the traveler leaned against it, feeling its solidity, listening to the quiet of the night. The sound of the traveler's own breathing was the loudest thing in the world, steady and deep, a rhythm that matched the pulse of the earth. The clouds moved slowly overhead, their shapes invisible but their presence felt, a soft veil that covered the stars and muffled the light. There was no destination to this night walk, no reason to move except the pleasure of moving. The traveler had walked all day and would walk again tomorrow, but the night was different, a time for different rhythms, different thoughts. The hours stretched ahead, long and peaceful, filled with the simple act of walking through the darkness, feeling the cool air on the face, listening to the soft sounds of the sleeping countryside. A sheep called from the distance, the sound a long, low note that seemed to reach across the fields with a message of contentment. The traveler listened to this call, let it settle into the consciousness, let it become part of the fabric of the night. The sheep had been calling like this for centuries, their voices carrying across the hills in the darkness, a reminder that the world continued its quiet cycles regardless of human presence. The lane continued, and the traveler continued with it, the feet finding their way without thought, the mind settling into a state of peaceful emptiness. The night was vast and beautiful, filled with small sounds and small wonders, and the traveler was content to move through it without hurry, without purpose, without anything but the simple pleasure of being here. The clouds thickened slightly, covering the stars more completely, and the darkness deepened. But the traveler was not afraid, could not be afraid, in this gentle landscape. The lane was known, the hedges were known. The whole journey had been a long and peaceful unfolding that had removed all fear and all urgency. The traveler walked on, the cloak warm around the shoulders, the pack a comfortable weight, the feet steady on the ancient road. After a time, the lane began to descend, and the traveler felt the ground slope away beneath the boots. The stars appeared again as the clouds thinned, their light soft and distant, and the traveler looked up at them with a sense of connection that needed no words. These same stars had shone on this same landscape for thousands of years, had guided travelers and shepherds and lovers, had witnessed all the quiet lives that had unfolded in this gentle corner of the world. The night deepened, and the traveler continued walking, the rhythm steady and sure, the mind peaceful and clear. There was nothing to do but walk, nothing to think but the thoughts that came and went like clouds in the sky, nothing to feel but the cool air on the face and the soft earth beneath the boots. The journey was long, and the night was long, and both were beautiful in their infinite patience. Dawn returned slowly, as it always does in this gentle landscape, a gradual lightening of the sky that began at the eastern horizon and spread across the heavens like water seeping through cloth. The traveler had walked through the night, had paused here and there to rest against gates and walls, had continued the steady rhythm of footsteps that had carried through all the hours of darkness. Now the first light was appearing, soft and gray, and the world was beginning to take shape again. The mist lay thick over the fields, a dense blanket of white that covered the earth and hid the horizon. The traveler walked into this mist, feeling its coolness on the face, smelling its dampness, recognizing it as the same mist that had greeted the dawn of the previous day. There was a comfort in this repetition, a sense of cycles that continued without change, a rhythm that held the world in its gentle embrace. The path had led to a river, a slow and quiet waterway that moved with almost no sound through the flat landscape. The traveler followed this river, walking along its bank, watching the mist lift in patches to reveal the pale surface of the water. The river was dark, almost black, and the reflections on its surface were dim and indistinct, shapes that were half seen and half imagined. The reeds along the bank were tall and thick, their tops waving gently in the faint breeze, their stems making a soft rustling sound that was like the whisper of many small voices. The traveler walked among these reeds, feeling their touch on the cloak, hearing their song, moving through them as though through a curtain of green and gold. The mist softened everything, blurred the edges of the world, and the traveler moved through this softness with the same unhurried pace that had carried through all the miles of the journey. The water of the river moved with a sound that was almost too quiet to hear, a soft murmur that was like the breathing of a sleeping giant. The traveler stopped at the river's edge and looked down into the water, seeing the mist reflected on its surface, seeing the occasional ripple where a fish rose to the surface and then sank again. The water was dark and deep, but it held no menace, only the quiet stillness of something that had been flowing for centuries and would flow for centuries more. A simple breakfast was taken on the riverbank, the last of the bread and cheese spread out on the cloth, the traveler sitting on a mossy stone and watching the mist slowly lift. The bread was dry now, the cheese had lost its freshness, but both were still good, still nourishing, still a gift from the day before. The traveler ate slowly, savoring each bite, feeling the cool air on the face, listening to the soft sounds of the river and the reeds. The mist continued to lift, revealing more of the landscape with each passing minute. The far bank of the river appeared, a line of green that was still soft and indistinct, and beyond it fields that were just beginning to take shape. A heron stood in the shallows, motionless, its gray feathers almost invisible against the mist. The traveler watched the heron, watched its patient stillness, felt a kinship with this creature that could wait so long and so peacefully. The river path continued, and the traveler continued along it, the boots finding their way on the damp earth, the cloak warm against the morning chill. The mist was thinning now, becoming a veil rather than a blanket, and the world was emerging from its soft cocoon. The traveler walked on, following the river, watching the light grow gradually brighter, feeling the day begin to warm. A small wooden bridge crossed the river at a point where the water was narrow and shallow, and the traveler stopped on this bridge, looking down at the water below. The current was visible here, a gentle movement that carried leaves and twigs toward some distant sea. The traveler watched these small things pass beneath, noticing how they moved with the water, how they were carried along without resistance, how they accepted their journey without thought. The morning grew brighter still, and the mist lifted enough to reveal a wide meadow on the far bank, dotted with sheep that were just beginning to stir. The traveler crossed the bridge and walked through this meadow, passing among the sheep, which looked up with mild curiosity and then returned to their grazing. The grass was wet with dew, soaking the boots and the hem of the cloak, but the traveler did not mind. There was something refreshing about the dampness, something that connected the body to the earth in a way that dry ground could never do. The sun appeared at last, a pale disk behind the thinning clouds, and its light spread across the landscape like a blessing. The traveler walked in this light, feeling its warmth on the face, watching the shadows it cast on the meadow. The mist was almost gone now, retreating to the low places, and the world was fully visible, green and beautiful and filled with the soft sounds of a morning that had no urgency. The river continued its slow course, and the traveler followed it, walking with the same steady pace that had carried through the night, through the dawn, through all the miles of this endless journey. The day stretched ahead, long and peaceful, and the traveler was content to walk through it, to follow the river, to watch the landscape unfold in its quiet and beautiful way. The river path began to climb, the ground rising gently to meet a series of low rolling hills that stretched across the landscape like waves on a green sea. The traveler climbed this gradual ascent, feeling the change in the air as the altitude increased, noticing how the sounds of the river faded and were replaced by the sound of the wind. The hills were open and exposed, covered with short grass that waved in the breeze like the fur of a great green animal. The view from the top of the first hill was wide and sweeping, a panorama of green fields and dark hedgerows, of distant farmhouses and ancient church towers, of clouds that moved slowly across the vast sky. The traveler stopped at this high place and stood for a long time, looking out at the landscape, feeling the wind on the face, breathing the clean air that seemed to hold the very essence of the English countryside. The hills stretched away in every direction, gentle swells of green that rose and fell with a rhythm that matched the breathing of the earth. The traveler walked along the ridge, following a path that was worn into the grass by centuries of shepherds and walkers, a path that had no destination but simply followed the contours of the land. The pace was easy, almost lazy, the steps short and unhurried. The body relaxed in the warmth of the sun that was now fully visible above the clouds. A single cowbell rang somewhere in the distance, its tone carrying across the hills with a clear and melodic sound. The traveler stopped to listen, letting the sound settle into the consciousness, feeling its connection to the landscape that had produced it. The cowbell was a sound of peace, a sound of routine, a sound that had been echoing across these hills for generations. The traveler listened until the sound faded, then continued walking, the rhythm unchanged, the peace undisturbed. The grass underfoot was short and springy, a natural carpet that made walking a pleasure rather than an effort. The traveler walked with a lightness that had not been possible on the lane or the meadow, feeling the body lift with each step, feeling the wind carry the cares of the previous day away. The hills were a place of freedom, of openness, of a beauty that required no words and asked for nothing but presence. A stone stood at the highest point of the next hill, a large, flat rock that had been worn smooth by the elements. The traveler sat on this stone, feeling its warmth, looking out at the view that stretched in every direction. The cheese that had been carried for so long was finally finished, and the traveler ate the last piece with a sense of completion, savoring its sharp flavor, remembering all the miles that had been walked since it was first placed in the pack. The clouds moved slowly overhead, their shadows passing across the hills in a slow dance of light and dark. The traveler watched these shadows, noticing how they changed the colors of the landscape, how they brought out the subtle greens and golds that lay beneath the surface of the grass. A group of birds circled in the distance, their wings catching the light, their flight a pattern of grace and elegance. The rest on the high stone was long and deep, a rest that asked for nothing and gave everything. The traveler sat with the wind in the hair, the sun on the face, the view filling the eyes with a beauty that was at once vast and intimate. The hills were a place of rest, a place of peace, a place where the soul could expand and the spirit could find its natural home. When the traveler finally stood, it was with a sense of renewed energy, a feeling of lightness that had not been present before. The descent from the high stone was gradual, the path leading down the far side of the hill toward a valley that lay green and inviting below. The traveler walked this descent with the same steady pace, the knees bending slightly, the body leaning back to maintain balance, the eyes fixed on the valley that waited ahead. The valley was a place of softness, of gentle curves and warm colors, of a river that wound through meadows and a village that clustered around a church spire. The traveler walked toward this valley, not hurrying, not anticipating, only moving with the steady rhythm that had carried through all the miles of the journey. The hills were behind now, and the valley was ahead, and the traveler was content to be between them, in the middle of a journey that had no end and needed none. The valley road was broad and empty, a ribbon of pale stone that wound through a landscape of green fields and scattered trees. The traveler walked this road with the same steady pace, the boots finding their rhythm on the hard surface, the cloak settling around the shoulders with the comfort of long familiarity. The afternoon light was soft and golden, the shadows long, the air filled with the scent of ripening grain and wild flowers. A small stream ran alongside the road, its water clear and shallow, its song a quiet counterpoint to the sound of footsteps. The traveler looked at this stream from time to time, watching its movement, noticing the pattern of light on its surface, the small fish that darted in its depths. The stream was a companion, a constant presence that added its voice to the symphony of the afternoon. A distant farm building rose above the hedgerows, its roof of red tile, its walls of white plaster, its windows small and dark. The traveler looked at this building, watched it grow slowly closer, then recede again as the road carried on. There was no need to stop at the farm, no reason to seek its hospitality. It was simply part of the landscape, a reminder that lives were being lived in this gentle valley, that families were gathering around tables, that the world continued in its quiet cycles. The road led to a bridge, an old stone structure that arched over a wider river than the one that had accompanied the road. The traveler stopped on this bridge, leaning on its stone parapet, looking down at the water below. The river was deep here, dark and slow, its surface broken only by the occasional swirl where the current met some hidden obstacle. The traveler watched the water for a long time, feeling its movement, sensing its depth, recognizing it as part of the same river system that had been followed through the mist of the morning. The sun had begun its descent, the light taking on that warm, honeyed quality that speaks of approaching evening. The traveler stood on the bridge, feeling the warmth of the stone through the hands, watching the reflections of clouds on the water, breathing the air that was growing cooler with each passing minute. The day had been long, and the journey had been peaceful, and the traveler felt the weight of the hours in the body, not as weariness but as a gentle heaviness that was not unpleasant. A sheltered spot was found near the road, under a large oak tree that spread its branches in a generous canopy. The ground beneath was soft with fallen leaves, and the traveler settled into this place, spreading the cloak as a blanket, feeling the earth beneath the body. The oak had stood here for many years, its roots deep in the soil, its branches reaching toward the sky. The traveler rested against its trunk, feeling its solidity, sensing its age and its patience. The road was quiet, the stream was soft, and the traveler was at peace. The valley lay around, green and beautiful, the light fading slowly, the sounds of the day giving way to the sounds of evening. A bird sang from the branches above, its voice clear and sweet, and the traveler listened to this song. Let it fill the consciousness. Let it become part of the quiet that was settling over everything. There was no need to walk further today, no need to reach any particular destination. The journey had been long, and the body was content to rest. The traveler lay under the oak tree, wrapped in the warm cloak, feeling the soft earth beneath, watching the light fade from the sky. The branches above were dark shapes against the pale sky, and the first stars were beginning to appear, faint points of light that promised another night of peace. The evening deepened, and the traveler settled deeper into rest, the breathing slowing, the muscles relaxing, the mind growing quiet. The sounds of the valley were fading, the bird's song giving way to the silence of night, the stream murmuring its eternal song. The traveler was not asleep, but was close to it, in that state of rest that is neither waking nor sleeping, a state of pure peace that asked for nothing and offered everything. The night had returned, soft and complete, covering the valley like a blanket of velvet. The traveler remained under the oak tree, wrapped in the warm cloak, feeling the deep comfort of the earth beneath and the sheltering presence of the branches above. There was no more walking to be done, no more miles to be covered. The journey had reached its natural end, and the traveler was content to rest. The sounds of the night were soft and gentle, a lullaby that had been sung for centuries in this quiet corner of the world. The leaves of the oak moved in the faint breeze, their whisper a sound that was barely audible, barely present, a sound that seemed to come from the edge of hearing and then fade away. The traveler listened to this sound. Let it fill the consciousness. Let it become the only thing that existed. A distant owl called, its voice a soft, rhythmic hooting that seemed to measure the passage of time. The traveler heard this call, recognized it, felt its connection to the long tradition of English nights that had been accompanied by this same sound. The owl called again, and then was silent, and the night was quiet once more. The trickle of water was still audible, the stream that followed the valley road, its sound almost too faint to hear, a presence rather than a noise. The traveler focused on this sound, letting it become the center of awareness, letting it carry the thoughts away on its gentle current. The water was eternal, had always been there, would always be there, and the traveler felt a kinship with it that needed no words. The breathing had slowed, had become deep and regular, a rhythm that matched the rhythm of the earth. The traveler lay under the oak, feeling the warmth of the cloak, feeling the cool air on the face, feeling the solidity of the ground beneath. There was no thought of the past or the future, no concern for anything that lay beyond this moment. There was only the night, the oak, the stream, and the quiet. The sounds grew softer still, each one fading away until there was almost nothing left. The leaves still whispered, but so faintly that it was hard to tell whether the sound was real or imagined. The water still trickled, but it seemed to come from a great distance, from the other end of a long and peaceful dream. The traveler lay in this soft world, feeling the heaviness of rest, the comfort of stopping, the deep and complete peace of being. The final paragraphs would grow slower and softer, each word a step toward the ultimate stillness that was the goal of all this journey. The traveler had walked across Old England, through lanes and meadows, through woods and villages, through mists and hills and valleys. And now the traveler rested, in the deep quiet of the night, under an ancient oak, wrapped in a warm cloak, breathing the soft air, listening to the gentle sounds that faded one by one. There was no more to be said, no more to be done. The story had reached its quiet end, and the peace that it had been building from the very beginning was now complete. The traveler lay under the oak tree. The night settled around like the softest blanket, the stars appearing one by one in the clear sky above. The leaves still whispered, the water still trickled, the owl still called from the distance. But these sounds were fading now, becoming part of the larger silence that was the true music of the night. And so, dear listener, the journey ends where it must always end, in the quiet of the night, in the warmth of rest, in the peace of a world that asks nothing and offers everything. My name is Mrinmoy, and I thank you for sharing this long and gentle journey through Old England. May you sleep as peacefully as the traveler under the oak tree, wrapped in the comfort of the night, surrounded by the soft sounds of a world that rests. Good night, and may your dreams be as gentle as the English countryside.